Buckets of blood. Okay, where did the concept of him as a Jedi come from? I don't think anyone in the right mind would want to call another person buckets of blood. I think there's someone in a particular mindset that would call themselves buckets of blood. Welcome to Death Watch, the Star Wars podcast from a galaxy not so far away. I'm Chris Skull. Today we'll be talking to New York Times bestselling author of Ballad and Dagger and the lead story architect of the High Republic series, Daniel Jose Older. We're really excited to have Daniel on board with us today because, one, we love Star Wars, and two, Mike and I were also architects, just of a different nature, but design and world building as part of the creative process is something that we highly respect and love, and we want to discuss that further with someone who's on the creative side of Star Wars. So Daniel, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Well, first and foremost, how did you get involved in writing? What life experiences have you had that led you to this point?
You know, I've really always loved storytelling. I always knew I'd be in the creative world somehow or another. I wasn't sure how, so I did spend a lot of my life kind of trying out different things and seeing what really was going to be my voice. And I'm really glad I did it that way, honestly. I think there's a certain idea, certain people's paths really just take them on a straight line and then that's what they do. For me, it was really valuable to have been a paramedic, to have been a musician, to have been an organizer, to have been a cartoonist when I was a really little kid. You know, all of those things really fed me and taught me a lot about being a writer and about storytelling, about human emotions and conflict and all this stuff that really makes a good storyteller. So I just really value all those different directions that my path has taken me. I learned a lot.
No, I appreciate that. I think it's always, especially as someone who's on the creative side, you mentioned there's never a singular path. You know, some career paths, it is pretty linear, but especially when it comes to the creative side, you'll see different people coming from completely different backgrounds and walks of life, and then all of a sudden it's like, yep, I'm just making something new just because I can, and I'm having fun with it. Exactly. And that's the beauty. That's the beautiful part of it.
Yeah.
How did you get involved in the Star Wars franchise in general? Because you've written a lot of work, especially young adult novels. But how did you get involved with the franchise? Were you already a fan before jumping on board with the High Republic?
Oh, yeah. I've been a fan my whole life. I literally, Return of the Jedi was the first movie I saw at the movie theaters. I was 3 years old. And, since then, I've been a Star Wars fan, like a hardcore, immersed in the lore and world of it, Star Wars fan. So I've always loved it. So, when they at a certain point in my career, I had a couple books out, just like, a couple books. And a couple years into my career. And they asked me to write a short story for the From a Certain Point of View anthology, which commemorated the 40th anniversary of A New Hope. And so, of course, I just jumped at the opportunity. Like, it hadn't even really occurred to me to write Star Wars up until shortly before that. It just wasn't on my radar as like something I could do. I don't know why. They've been putting out great books for years, obviously. So I was really excited about it. It was a really, really great and fun opportunity. And I let them know that I would be very interested to write a novel if that were to come down the pipeline or whatever they had available. I would be super excited to write it. And then a couple months later, they did. And they reached out about the Han and Lando novel, which became Last Shot.
Which, by the way, my partner Mike got a hold of it. He hasn't read it through it completely. But when I asked him for the notes, he loves it, especially the humor aspect of it. Like, it really feels like you captured that relationship between Han and Lando, especially in that time period.
Right.
It's post Empire, right? Post Return of the Jedi.
Return of the Jedi, and then it jumps back into like Solo era a little bit.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, which, by the way, we joked around, and we've joked around on our podcast before. We're excited about the Lando series that's coming out for Disney Plus, and we want to pitch this idea that we're really hoping that we would see is that we want to come out like How I Met Your Mother, but it's from Lando's perspective. So it's old Lando retelling his stories to like his daughter of young Lando and all his adventures. And we kind of saw that we saw that in the Solo movie, where he's like recording, do those holograms of his own stories. And his life is so fascinating.
Yeah.
and all the adventures that he's gotten himself into. So I would love to see something like that. I don't know if you have any thoughts on what you'd like to see in that series.
Oh no, I'm just excited to see it. With the TV stuff, I'm just looking forward to everything coming out. It sounds really cool, so I'm excited.
So what's involved in being part of the creative side of Star Wars? Like who's involved in your team, and what's a typical brainstorming session like for you?
Well, the main team, is the five authors that have been kind of have been working on the main story of the High Republic this whole time. So it's me, Justina, Kev, Charles, and Claudia, and we will, we'll meet to break story, kind of like any writer's room. If you can imagine what happens in a writer's room on a TV show, people will toss out different ideas. And that's kind of when we're talking about the meta story, right? Because there are levels of story. There's the big beats of things, the galactic-wide events, like the Great Disaster, which really opened up the whole thing. And then we think about what different angles and how we get into the micro kind of layers of that, and with our individual stories, right? So as a team, we really build the larger beats, and some of the main characters kind of come out of those brainstorming sessions, and then we kind of go off and do our own thing, bring stuff back. So it's a constant flow of leaving and coming back. And then Michael Siglane, I should say, he's kind of like the what's the guy's name? Nick Fury of the whole situation, So he really just organizes everything and gets things together. He's a really thoughtful storyteller himself and editor and all that. So that's pretty much how it works.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, because that was going to be my follow-up question: is how much freedom do you have in this world building of the High Republic area? Because this is a brand new chapter, figuratively speaking, in the Star Wars universe. It's never been told before.
Yeah, and that's one of the appeals of it, I think, for all of us as creators, is like, there's always challenges of writing Star Wars in terms of but the most challenges and the joys of it is that you're in constant collaboration, both with material that's been there for 40 years and newer stuff, and all along the way, right? So that's challenging when you're writing in an era where the main beats of the world have already been mapped out, right? So you're not going to have a Jedi. It's going to be rare to have a Jedi, in the post-Order 66 world, right? There weren't that many left. They're out there, but there's not that many. Or if you have a Jedi pre-Order 66, they're probably going to die. And so those are major kind of like clamps on the storytelling. And the High Republic era is totally free of that. We don't know anything about it except what we're building right now, and that's what's so exciting about it. So it's much less restrictive than writing than when I was writing Last Shot, for instance. Mind you, I think those restrictions can be really great for creativity. It's not always a burden. I think it can sound burdensome, but it pushes you in different directions. So it's one experience to write in a wide open era, and it's another to write in a much more clamped down era, and you create the best work you can, depending on the circumstances.
Yeah, I agree. Sometimes it's best. Sometimes depending on the circumstance, when you're designing or creating something, having a not a series of what's the word I'm looking for? Having an outline or certain restrictions allows you to focus, versus if you have complete control, sometimes it's hard to just like you said, to clamp down on a specific idea and flesh it out, the details. But it's also fun just to write something completely new. And I can kind of tell, because I follow through. I'm caught up right now in the High Republic Adventures, the graphic novel, and I can tell you guys have been having fun with it. Oh, yeah. Not just from the writing perspective, but also from the artwork and the character building. And to that point, as a writer in this new universe, what's some of your favorite parts that you wish you could dwell on or expand on? Like, do you have any particular favorite characters that you've written?
Right. I certainly have been, like, really one of my favorite moments in the opening 5 issues is when Zine kind of gets in touch with her anger, let's say, right at the very end.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's such a profound moment in a lot of ways, and in part because I think sometimes we either trivialize or just criminalize anger. And while what she does is wrong, or what she starts to do is wrong, I think it's also a really powerful moment in how the Jedi react to her afterwards, and that they don't banish her or tell her she was like a horrible person for doing it. They actually bring her deeper into the fold, and really want to help her learn how to use the Force in a positive way. And I just think that's such a beautiful moment of the Jedi being, living up to their compassion and their empathy that they're, that we know them for. And I also think just Zine has a really interesting trajectory. There's a lot more ahead for her, of course. And even in the very first issue, there's so much complexity to her character and the choices that she's kind of forced to make. And then what she has to do beyond that. So Zine is definitely someone I'm really excited about. And then of course Lula too. They're so different from each other, but they really have a deep, deep connection. And just this, I will say this: there's just so much ahead. It's hard for me to
Yeah.
talk about it without being like, because even Farzala and Cord in the next couple of issues, especially, we really get to know them a lot better, and we get to know more about their lives and what they're about and what they struggle with, and so that's also really exciting. There's just so much to come.
Yeah, no, I'm excited for it. Like I see that, especially someone who's untrained. Her character is someone who's just lived practically an orphan. Although she was, even though she's in the community, it's hard for her to have a sense of place, and that can be very dangerous, especially for someone who's has this new power on, that's completely unhinged almost. So you can see elements where she almost loses that control with,
Right.
especially with her friend Crix, who also I'm starting to see some parallels with, almost like with Kylo Ren when he was young and when he met with the Knights of Ren. So I'm starting to. But speaking of parallels, I do love, especially in the artwork, the parallels of the paths between Zine and Crix. How they're literally, they're juxtaposed together on the artwork, but their stories are told at the same time, so that we know that this one's clearly going on a lighter side, on a lighter path. This one's clearly going on a darker path. And that's, at its core, that's what Star Wars is, especially Star Wars stories, where you have decisions to make, and those decisions will have consequences, and they can lead you down one path and down the other. Sometimes they're not linear, like we talked about, but your decisions matter, and how they affect the people around you. So I'm very excited to see what we see moving forward. I got to take a second to mention this. Buckets of Blood. Okay, how did you? Where did the concept of him as a Jedi come from?
He was actually the original Buckets of Blood was a legendary paramedic in New York City. So when I was a medic, we didn't overlap, but I would hear a lot of stories about him. People used to talk about Buckets of Blood, and he was famous for his name, which I'm pretty sure he came up with. I don't know that for a fact, but it was kind of my understanding of it.
I don't think anyone in the right mind would want to call another person Buckets of Blood. I think there's someone in a particular mindset that would call themselves Buckets of Blood.
And it's hard to understand without really knowing how kind of being a medic works. Like there's a lot of glory in, the trauma of the job, to put it really bluntly. Like not that people get off on that, and it's not an adrenaline high, which I think people really must understand it. You're literally there to help save people's lives. And so you want to do your job. You want to be effective at your job, which means that someone's really bad day is a moment for you to step up and really do your job well. And that's what we're there to do, besides have a paycheck and, keep a paycheck. We're really there to save lives. And that's a complicated thing to understand from the outside, I think. And, there's a certain gallows humor that goes with that. There's just a certain weird outlook on life that can come with that when you deal with death on a daily basis, and when you sometimes get to stop death from having its day. So, yeah, that always fascinated me, though, that someone would really take that moniker on to the degree that he did, and that he was so proud of it, and he would come. It's more so now like a very regulated kind of world in terms of what you do and don't say on the radio, on the EMS frequencies, and everything like that. But back in the heyday of Buckets of Blood, it was much more the Wild West, from what I understand. And so he would come up on the air and address himself as Buckets of Blood to either accept or not accept jobs that were given to him, which is also something that you can't really do. So that always fascinated me, that it was so gory, but it was actually about healing. And it was definitely in a meeting at the ranch when we were just first hashing out the idea of the High Republic, when they said, what are some cool Jedi that you would like to see in the High Republic? And I was like, oh, Buckets of Blood, And then he went on the massive list of all the Jedi that we're talking about, and then no one used them for a while. Go figure. And then I was like, you know what? I need a guy to like be Yoda's second while they're out in the galaxy doing their thing. And I think I just put in a placeholder of Jedi or something that I hadn't really fleshed out. And then I was like, oh wait, no one's using buckets of blood yet. That's my Jedi. Like, let me bring him in, and the rest is history. It was Harvey that
Yeah.
made him a Chagrian. I think in the script I just said, someone big and imposing and intense looking, whatever species you want. And Harvey very wisely
Yeah.
chose Chagrian.
Yeah, you can definitely tell he's a formidable character. He's super tall versus like the prowess and the wisdom of Yoda.
Right.
But making someone who's that big and burly, you think that this is the dude that's going to help you out of a scrap, and all he really wants to do is just heal and be a medic and to teach others to, I would imagine that his style of fighting is probably kind of like that in Aikido, where it's less about trying to be offensive and more about defensive and using your opponent's moves against them, or it's like you're not like you want to hurt the person, you just want to stop the battle as soon as possible.
Right.
And so I'm starting to see these in these different characters, and I really appreciate that. I also really appreciate the fact that he and Yoda both bake their own snacks.
Yes.
and are and love to share that with the Padawans. Like, I see this relationship happening. They have, it's more, we know that the Jedi don't really form attachments. That's what we've always been told. But you clearly see, especially with Buckets of Blood and with Yoda, that they really care about the Padawan, like as if they were their own kids. They really do feel like they're responsible for them.
And that's so interesting, because I don't think not having attachments doesn't mean you don't love anybody, right? Like, you're not attached to anybody. Those are actually different things. And even that question, it kind of asks us to unravel those different possibilities. Can you love someone without being attached to them? You must, in fact. And that is part of loving someone, is being able to let go of them sometimes. And, I think that's a higher calling in a way. And, I just love that the Jedi Order and the Force itself kind of demand us to think more deeply about questions like that.
Yeah, I agree. Now, not to, just a side note, you mentioned that you went to the ranch. You're referring to Skywalker Ranch, right?
Yeah.
Just, I can't wrap my head around the fact that, people just go to Skywalker Ranch, and then that's where everybody goes to basically plan out and brainstorm.
I think it's
everything, right?
My understanding is that it's actually pretty rare to get there. So we were very.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think most writers get to go there, at least not of books. So I know it was a very special thing, and I will always cherish it. It was definitely one of the greatest places I've ever been.
Oh, that is awesome.
Yeah.
Did you get to meet the man himself?
No, George Lucas, no.
Okay. No, but just going on property is still pretty cool.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I want to focus on the creative process. How, like, for instance, if anybody who's listening to this and they're an aspiring writer or artist or creative, what recommendations would you have? Like, for instance, what would a young Daniel tell Daniel Older? What would an older Daniel Older tell a younger one now?
I really do think, to kind of take it back to the beginning of our conversation, I think allowing yourself to trot down multiple paths, and allowing your own path to really be its own, is really important to be an artist. You have to be able to listen, first and foremost, both to yourself and to the world around you. And that includes listening about your own process, listen about your own path. It's not going to be mine. It's not going to be, anyone else's, but yours. And that's really important to recognize. Because the worst thing is to go along a path thinking it's yours, or thinking it's the right path, and it's someone else's path. And you've been, I don't really think there is such a thing as being lost or being astray in the creative process, because you always learn from everything that's happening. It all feeds you. Even the worst moments really do. Sometimes those are the ones that teach you the most, So understanding that really does allow you to kind of ease your way into whatever it is you need to do, and be forgiving of yourself, and allow your process to be what it is. I didn't set out to be a Star Wars writer. I love storytelling and I love Star Wars. And if you put those two things together, that's what makes a good Star Wars writer. And I'm happy to be here. And I'm also happy to write lots of other things that aren't Star Wars, because that's my path. There's other people that only write Star Wars, and that's their path, So it really is a question. I think the earlier on you can do this, but really at any moment is best in your career, in your trajectory, because it's really not over until it's over. So there's no such thing as too late either. It's important to have a conversation with yourself about, what does success really mean to you? What is it you really want to be doing? What are the stories you're really driven to tell, and take it from there.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. You always have to have that, like you said, you have to have that conversation with yourself. Like, what's more important? It could be, It could be money, it could be fame, but it could also just be doing something that you love or making something that could be for the benefit of others.
Right.
Those are the questions. Those are tough questions you have to ask yourself. That'll shape you. What are your, as a writer in this creative part of the Star Wars universe, and as a creator and as a fan, what are your future aspirations? Like, what would you try your hand in something other than writing?
Like what?
Well, you've mentioned before that you've been a comic artist, that you've done visual arts before. Potentially, would you try your hand at even directing?
Yeah, directing maybe. Directing maybe, not drawing, because I still love drawing, but it's not to do professionally. I just enjoy doing it. I do send sketches and stuff to the artists just so they have a sense of certain things that I do it rarely. But if there's certain things that I'm trying to conceptualize that are very complex or just don't quite get it with the words, I'll draw it up. But that's about the limit of where I would go. But yeah, I love writing in all mediums, so wherever that might take me, we'll see.
Okay. That's good. What are you, in terms of the future of Star Wars, what are you excited to see personally, like as a fan? What would you like to see more of?
Definitely just all the stuff happening with The Mandalorian is amazing. The Boba Fett show, I can't wait for.
Oh, yeah.
Everything coming up, I'm excited for. I will say I really love what Charles is doing with War of the Bounty Hunters, and just how big that crossover event is, and how cool. I'm really happy to be part of it. With I have a Zuckerson and Forlom one shot that's coming out as part of that whole thing, and that type of storytelling is so cool. It's in line with what we're doing with the High Republic, in that it's this multi-platform, singular platform, but multi-author story that's really entwined with all these different threads, flowing through it. And I think Star Wars has just always been a really good platform for that, because of how big the world is and how many possibilities there are for different stories within a single story, which is never a single story. And so kind of like, more of that.
Yeah, it's a big universe, so there's still a big canvas to fill.
Totally.
But if you could, pulling from your experiences as a fan from previous stories, if there's anything that you could, if it was you doing the writing, if you could rewrite or you can add on to any previous story in Star Wars, what would it be and why?
I don't know. I mean, honestly, the High Republic is pretty much the dream project, right? Because there's so much room to play. And I don't know if I would have come up with that answer if you'd asked me before I knew about the High Republic or before it existed. But just being able to write in such an open world, before everything, the possibilities are endless. It's huge, and we've already only just begun exploring that, but there's so much yet to come. This.
I think it's perfect, because I would have said something regarding the old Republic, but maybe not necessarily going that far.
Right.
Kind of like the same reason that you mentioned before, is you're not tied into the existing restrictions of the last 40 years of storytelling within that era. You
right.
almost have like more of a blank slate to work with from all the time period before then.
Right.
But I'm also really excited to see the after. Because now that the new sequels are done, it's a big what now? What happens now? Because it's almost like a completely new world at this point.
Yep.
So I'm personally excited to see that.
Totally.
If I know that there's certain aspects of the future of Star Wars that you can't share, and we want to respect that. But are there aspects of the High Republic that we can expect to be told in other mediums aside from in the in the graphic novel or in the written form?
I don't think I can comment on that, actually.
Okay. All right. That's fair. All right. So Daniel, thanks a lot for joining us. Can you tell people how they can find you, or maybe how they can reach out to you about your other projects?
Sure. So everything is on my website. It's my full name, DanielJoseOlder.net. DanielJoseOlder.net. You can find my books there. I actually have a couple of writing classes online that you can access through there. One is through a site called Noble that does audio classes, and the other is through Skillshare, which is video. So there's different tidbits about writing and fundamentals of writing. So yeah, find me there. There's a blog up there that talks about my ambulance years, all that. All my books are there. On social media, I'm on TikTok at Daniel Jose Older. I'm on Twitter at DJ Older, and I am on Instagram at Daniel Jose.
Awesome. Well, thanks for listening. This is the way.
This is the way.